It wasn't the prettiest performance, but Louisville defeated Georgia Tech in the ACC opener. It took key plays in all three phases of the game for the Cardinals to be victorious. We'll break it down on today's episode of Locked on Louisville.
You are Locked on Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this special Sunday evening edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to personally take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Louisville, 3-0 on the season, 1-0 in ACC play after defeating Georgia Tech 31-19 on Saturday. Wasn't the prettiest performance, but a win is a win, especially in conference play. It took some key plays in all three phases of the game to get the job done on Saturday. And yes, we'll discuss the penalties. We'll go through some of the self-inflicted mistakes that kept Georgia Tech in this game and much, much more. This is a complex result because two things are true at one time. For starters, it wasn't the prettiest performance. Like, there were some mistakes on offense and defense. There were some issues with discipline as it relates to penalties. The officiating was comical. More on that coming up at the conclusion of the show. And ultimately, it felt like Louisville just didn't do what they needed to really put this game out of reach. They let Georgia Tech hang around. They made some key mistakes that kept GT in the game. And it was a little bit too close for comfort until the Cardinals rose to the occasion at the end. But what's also true is that Louisville won the conference opener, and they covered the spread. And I know that covering the spread is like not the end-all, be-all. Like, just because you say, well, they covered the spread, that really doesn't mean too much. I just think it magnifies the result that Louisville won this game by double digits. Sort of like last season's opener against Georgia Tech, the Cardinals won that game, but it wasn't really a convincing victory. So people were torn, depending on who you talk to, was going to dictate the opinion on the result. Is that, yeah, a win is great and all, but how good is Louisville truly? Right? A lot of people want to know, or a lot of people wanted to see, I should say, Louisville go out in this game, dominate, not give Georgia Tech a chance, and win the game. And like I said, multiple things can be true at one time. I will say this. I don't think Georgia Tech is a bad team. I told that to anyone that would listen on this show, that Georgia Tech was a trap game. This is a team that brought back the majority of their offense from last year, an offense that gave Louisville fits. Their defense was sort of up in the air, but I mentioned that Brent Key, if there's one thing he does extremely well, it's get his guys ready for these types of games. Like Georgia Tech, you'll rarely ever see them coming out not motivated against a ranked team, especially on the road. Coming into this game, they were 3-2 basically in the past 12 months. Or 12 months. 3-2 in ranked games. 2 of those on the road. So I don't think Georgia Tech is a bad team. Like, I do think that this is a Yellow Jacket squad that is going to be somewhat in the hunt for Charlotte. I don't think it is probable with the Cardinals giving them that second conference loss. That was one of the things that we mentioned was at stake. You sort of push the Ramblin' Wreck onto the ropes. And that's great that you've done that. But Georgia Tech was still a quality opponent. I will stand by that. And you beat them by 12 points. The spread was 10.5. My prediction for the game was 31-20. Wrong is wrong, but I thought that it was going to be close in the first half. It was 17-14. I felt like Louisville was going to pull away in the second half. I didn't think that it was going to take that long. I definitely didn't think that it was going to happen in the way that it did happen. But at the end of the day, does it really matter? Because a win is a win. Like, I know. Look, I know. I'm not being shallow here. I'm looking beneath the surface level, and I understand that there is a good amount of stuff that Louisville has to work on. 100%. Definitely not a finished product. But it's the same tune that I was singing last season. It's like, look, give them some time to work things out. The reality of the matter is that this was their first time that they were tested this season. First time adversity hit, a brand new group with a bunch of transfers incoming. You needed to see how they handled adversity. And they handled it pretty well. They handled it pretty well all across the team. This was a complete team victory for your Louisville Cardinals. And that is the mantra here, is that business was handled, victory was achieved. A win is a win, especially in conference play. And do I need to remind you that if you look across the entire country over the past 4 weeks of the season, what are we seeing? We're seeing ranked teams struggle, whether it be on home or at home or on the road, struggle with unranked teams, and they're losing. There's so much parity right now, maybe outside of like the top 4 or 5 teams. There is so much parity in college football right now. There's so much parity in the ACC. There's so much parity across the national landscape. Like, ranked teams are losing left and right. And you look at the teams ahead, like USC. Now, granted, that was against Michigan. They lost that game. Missouri almost lost to Vanderbilt. You know, there's all these games that you're watching unfold. Kansas State lost. Oklahoma State lost. The list goes on, right? So I'm not, saying all that to excuse the Cardinals for not playing well. I'm just saying that sometimes when a ranked team gets tested for the very first time, they can struggle. I don't think that this is any type of indication on how good Louisville is. I think Louisville is going to be a lot better further down the season than they were on Saturday. Don't forget, Georgia Tech had a small advantage. They had played 4 games coming into this contest, and 2 of those were in the ACC. They played Florida State and Syracuse, and say what you want about both of those teams. But it's not like they just played Austin Peay and Jacksonville State. Like, this was the first test. This was a trap game. This was going up against a team that is really good at rising to the occasion and staying motivated. So the point that I'm trying to get across here is that I think we should be celebrating a win more than we are right now. I think we are analyzing this result far too much. Like, there is complete validity in understanding that there are things that need to be worked on. Things need to be improved. That's for certain. But at the end of the day, a win is a win. And despite how ugly it may look sometimes, and despite what people say about the ACC, conference games can be challenging. I mean, you heard Brent Key this week. This was what he dubbed championship week. This is a game that they wanted to win. They wanted to avenge the last season loss. And I felt like Louisville matched that energy. One thing that does give me some encouragement is that you can argue that Louisville should have won this game by over 20 points. 100%. They left a lot of points on the board. But those aren't the only things that should offer you encouragement. When we come back from break, we're going to explain something that Louisville did for the first time since 2011. That and more coming up on the next segment of Locked on Louisville. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a huge return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. If you go to FanDuel.com, hurry up, though, because there are a profit boost. There's a profit boost package with some profit boosts for tomorrow night's NFL Monday night kickoff game. So be sure to check that out. That's on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. I do want to give you a little bit of an update on the scheduling of the show. If you remember over the past couple of weeks, I've mentioned that I'll be out of town for the majority of this upcoming week, and I know that that is extremely inconvenient considering Louisville's going to go up to South Bend to play Notre Dame at the conclusion of this week. But unfortunately, it is what it is. We'll be at a job conference. So I am making it to where there will be at least 2 more episodes after this one. We'll continue to break down the Georgia Tech game. We will preview Notre Dame a little bit, and then I'll be back Friday night. So after the Notre Dame game, it is business as usual. But we sort of planned for this. That's why there were some more episodes early on in September. Just a heads up that there will basically be this and 2 more episodes through the duration of the week. So if you see that there's not 5, don't be alarmed. I just want to give you a heads up. So I mentioned before break that Louisville did something for the first time since 2011 on Saturday. That was block and return a field goal for a touchdown. And if that highlights anything, it's that this game was won in all 3 phases: offense, defense, special teams. Literally, like, everyone deserves the credit. Like, this is the true definition of an overall complete team victory, because each phase of the game, Louisville made plays when they needed to. You start with the defensive side of the ball. Things weren't really looking all that great for Louisville's offense early on. Some penalties, and such, to the point to where Georgia Tech scored the first touchdown of the game. After Louisville missed the field goal, the Cardinals had to punt the ball away. They downed the ball, I think, inside the 10-yard line. And what happened? The very next drive, Haynes King decides to try to improvise on 3rd down, throws a backward pass. Shout out to Quincy Riley for basically batting that pass down, causing the fumble, and Ramon Purrier scoring the touchdown on the scoop and score, his second of the young season. So defense right away made a big-time play that shifted the momentum in this game. And all 3, we're looking at 3 plays that completely shifted the momentum. Every time it felt like Georgia Tech was going to get right back in the game, boom, Louisville made the necessary plays. And it started out in that first half with the scoop and score close to the own end zone, because Georgia Tech moved the ball really well the previous drive. They moved the ball really well after that drive. They missed the field goal on that drive, but ultimately the point still stands. Yellow Jackets did a really good job of moving the ball in the first half. Like, they did a really good job moving the ball overall, but the Cardinal defense rose to the occasion. They didn't give it a chance to get to a double-digit deficit, and they tied the game up with that scoop and score, which was incredible. It was well-timed, too. Offensively speaking, you go to the Georgia Tech field goal in the second half. 13 play, I think it was 67-yard drive. It was like a 7.5 minute drive. Completely wild. But it was methodical. They converted multiple third downs. They just did what they had to. They did what they had to do. I mean, shout out to Haynes King and shout out to Buster Faulkner. Faulkner did a good job of really scheming against the Louisville defense. They made it was like a hybrid read option to where they brought the end around, but once that wide receiver came around, it was in that read option to where it was either handed off to Jamal Haynes or Malik Rutherford or Eric Singleton or keep it for himself. And Louisville kind of struggled with that for the duration of the game. But they were able to move the ball down the field and score or hit that field goal to tie it up at 17. Louisville needed to respond because Georgia Tech had all of the momentum. And then Tyler Shough throws a pass down the sideline. Ja'Cory Brooks gets turned around, a 360. The referee, the sideline throws the flag for pass interference over Brooks' head. And he's able to concentrate, locate that football, stay in bounds on the sideline, and get to the end zone. Incredible concentration, footwork, and overall awareness from the Alabama transfer. That play changed the momentum. And it was a key part of Louisville being victorious in this one because the Cardinals, it didn't feel like a must-score drive, but the backs were against the wall at that point, and you had to basically fight your way out of the corner. And Louisville did that. Ja'Cory Brooks, shout out to him. He has been fantastic in the early part of this season. He had 4 for 125 and a touchdown on Saturday, and the offense was able to do what it needed to do to create that big-time play that snatched the momentum back. But unfortunately, Louisville couldn't keep it because of a safety in the end zone where it looked like Tyler Shough got tripped up, right? And it was a rough one. It was a rough one. But Louisville was able to make up for it. It was 24-19. Georgia Tech goes for a field goal to cut the lead to 3. North Carolina transfer Tay Holloway comes across the right side, blocks the field goal, scoops it up, runs back the other way for a touchdown. First time that that's been done since 2011 for the Louisville Cardinals. Do you remember that game? Louisville went up to Morgantown, one of the final Big East matchups between the two, and the Cardinals escaped that with, I think they were an underdog in that game, but that's the last time that happened. It's been about a decade and a half. But special teams were really good in that dynamic. So, again, overall complete victory because that was the ultimate momentum shift. You go from being up by 2 with, 7 minutes to go to now being up by 12. It's a huge shift. It honestly was probably like the one play you can point to, like, show me why Louisville won this game. Boom, you're going to that play. Shout out to Tay Holloway for making that happen. But again, all 3 phases of the game required Louisville to rise to the occasion, and they did. That should be celebrated. This is the most overall complete victory that I've seen in a very long time. So it's not all, fine and dandy because you still have to talk about what went wrong. And I think that we need to start out, like we'll continue to break this down on the next episode. I think we need to start out by talking about the officiating and the self-inflicted mistakes that Louisville kind of put on themselves throughout this game. And we'll do that. I know it's definitely going to be a heated discussion that you all kind of want to hear. We'll break it down coming up on the next segment of Locked On Louisville. Today's title sponsor of the show is Game Time. Look, I am a huge fan of going to live events, no matter what kind. Going to the Colts Raiders New Year's Eve game last year was fantastic, and I look forward to going to the Chargers Saints game coming up in late October. Game Time has made it possible to get all of the benefits in one. When you download their app, it's the way to go. There is the all-in pricing feature that you can toggle that eliminates the surprise fees. There's the panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And there is the Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Final segment of this special Sunday night episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Thanks for being patient. I didn't have an episode out yesterday. Them 3:30 games make it kind of challenging. I really didn't have a great voice yesterday either. It's coming back today, but last night it was rough. Shout out to the fans at Cardinal Stadium. I know that there were some other events like Bourbon and Beyond going on, but shout out to those that were able to make it, and they stayed the whole time, and they withstood the blazing heat and just were absolutely rowdy in the fourth quarter. It definitely doesn't go unnoticed. You all have my respect. That was a frustrating game. Yes, Louisville won, and it's a lot more. It's able to be acceptable because they won the game, but at the same time, it was frustrating. Let's get the self-inflicting mistakes out of the way for the moment. Louisville gave up far too many big-time plays. They allowed 410 yards of total offense. Georgia Tech outgained Louisville, both passing and rushing. They gave up way too many big plays, especially at the very end of the first half when you had Georgia Tech on the ropes. It was 17-7. You let them go all the way. And here's the thing about this. You didn't rush the passer that much on that last drive, but you still allowed a guy to get behind the secondary. Haynes King found him at the 1-yard line, and ultimately they scored on 4th and goal to eventually be down 17-14.5. It looked like it was going to be 17-7 or at the very worst 17-10. That touchdown changed a lot of the momentum, right? There were some penalties that were justified where Louisville's offensive line just really wasn't able to create a ton of separation at times, and they had to resort to holding Georgia Tech defensive linemen, and rightfully so. Drives were stalled because of it. Now, not all the officiating was, or not all of the flags were justified, but there were definitely moments of this game to where you kept Georgia Tech in the game. You let Haynes King run all over you again, and you gave up big plays. And that basically kept the Yellow Jackets in this game, and luckily that did not cost you a win. But they have to be corrected. Now, look, I'm trying to word this in a respectful way. The officiating was not good. It was. And I know that some will say, well, why do you always complain about officiating? Talking about Louisville fans. You can't watch that game with an unbiased viewpoint and suggest to me that it wasn't officiated or that it was officiated well. The illegal block below the waist that took away a big-time play. There were plays that, like, ineligible receiver downfield was called basically after the guy got tackled on a 40-yard catch and run. There were a ton of plays that got called back that you look at them and I'm like, Ashton Gelati is getting held the majority of the plays, no calls. And if that's the case, that's fine. But it felt like things were being called differently on both sides. And the one thing that I was infuriated with the most, and I have a friend of mine who is a photographer who photographs Louisville games. He was on Georgia Tech's sideline yesterday. Luckily, during that whole debacle where the ball went over Haynes King's head, it looked like he was either going to get sacked or it was going to be a incomplete pass or even a turnover. Even so much that a flag was thrown, it was likely going to be illegal motion, illegal shift, illegal formation, you name it. They gave Georgia Tech the timeout. And that photographer told me after the game, point blank, when Brent Key was running down the sideline to call timeout, the referee did not even acknowledge it because he had to run down the sideline. He wasn't like he was right next to me. He had to run down the sideline to get to that sideline judge. That referee did not even look or acknowledge Brent Key. Until the ball was snapped over Brent Key's head, at that point, the referee made the judgment call to call a timeout. It's the first time, truthfully, that I've seen that in my 26 years on this earth, is that you are able to basically get bailed out by a timeout. And if it was like a one-time thing to where it was a cleanly officiated game, maybe you kind of overlook it a bit. Officiating was just not good in this game. And it feels like that's a running thing. When it comes to ACC referees and Louisville at home, it feels like the Cardinals never get favorable calls. And I'm not saying that like they have to get favorable calls because they're at home, but other teams do all the time. And Louisville feels like one of the only teams that I watch consistently, and I watch a lot of football, that just does not get calls at home. Like I can't think of like the last time Louisville's had like a legitimately favorable whistle at home. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. But when the trend is that Louisville consistently gets screwed at home in terms of officiating, I feel like there's an underlying issue. But I'm not going to sit here and just whine about it because it's over. The truth of the matter is that game was close, not just because of officiating. You kept Georgia Tech in this, you meaning the Louisville team. But you did what you needed to do to get the victory. That is the takeaway here. It wasn't pretty, but a win is a win is a win, especially when you talk about conference play. When we come back next episode, we're going to talk about some injury updates, good and bad. We'll talk about some of the big issues that Louisville had in the game that they have to improve on, and much, much more. All that coming up on the next episode of Locked on Louisville. Everyone have a great start to your week. Go Cards.